All right, so we're diving into some pretty complex territory today, folks. The world of cybercrime.
Yeah?
And specifically, how one nation is stepping up to fight back.
Right.
Kenya's Computer Misuse and Cybercrimes Act. We've got excerpts from the actual document.
Oh, interesting.
And trust me, it is a fascinating read.
Yeah, I bet.
It really gets you thinking about that balance, security versus freedom,
Right.
in our digital world. So if you're curious about how this law works,
Okay.
what's in it, why it matters to you,
Yeah.
stick around, because we're breaking it all down.
Let's do it.
Right off the bat, the Act doesn't waste any time. It lays out its goals. Its objects is what they call them.
Objects. Okay.
And Section 3, it's really clear it's all about protecting computer systems from misuse, right? But, and this is where things get really interesting,
Okay.
it's also about protecting people's rights.
Ah, I see. So it's about finding that balance,
Exactly.
which is always tricky.
Oh, absolutely. Trying to find that balance in a world where, let's face it, technology is always evolving.
Always a step ahead.
Faster than the law can sometimes keep up.
Exactly. And this is why the timing of this law in Kenya is so interesting. They enacted this back in 2018.
Okay.
And this was right when cybercrime was really exploding, especially in the developing world.
Yeah.
And you've got to remember, this was when Kenya was right in the middle of this whole mobile money revolution. Think M-Pesa.
Right.
This huge boom, though, it brought with it a whole new ways of challenges. We're talking financial fraud,
Yeah.
online harassment. you
Yeah.
know. It was like the dark side of this digital boom.
The downside.
Exactly. And it became impossible to ignore.
So they were basically trying to create like a legal framework
Yeah,
to get ahead of these threats.
exactly. They needed something,
Yeah.
right? A lot of countries were struggling with the same issues.
Of course, yeah.
But what makes Kenya stand out here, I think, is that they were really focused on protecting important stuff, like critical infrastructure.
I see.
They knew that in our world, everything is so connected
Oh, absolutely.
that the stakes were higher than ever.
Right.
Of course, a lot of countries, they've got similar laws. You look at the UK, they've got their Computer Misuse Act. The US, you've got the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act.
Right, right. So let's actually dive into the specifics, though.
Yep.
I'm looking at Part 3 of the Act here, and they list out the offenses, the things that they cover, and some of these are, I mean, real eye-openers.
Cool.
Like, for example, you've got cyber espionage, Section 21, and this isn't like your average hacking,
Right.
They're talking about benefiting a foreign state against Kenya. That's a whole other level.
It is. I mean, this really highlights that concern, over state-sponsored cyber attacks.
Right.
And for a country like Kenya, a developing nation, but one that's really establishing itself on the global stage,
Yeah.
protecting their digital sovereignty is crucial.
Yeah.
And this section really shows how seriously they're taking that threat.
Yeah.
But then you get into proving it.
Oh, I bet that's tricky.
That's where the headache starts. Imagine trying to prove, without a doubt, that some hacker, let's say in China, was working directly for their government to target, Kenya's energy grid or something.
Right.
Talk about a legal and technological nightmare.
Yeah, it's like, where do you even begin? And speaking of tricky, in a world that is just drowning in information, and let's be honest, misinformation,
Ooh, tell me about it.
I found Section 22
Okay.
particularly relevant.
Okay.
They call it false publications, but it's not just about posting something online that's not true.
Right.
It's deeper than that.
It's about intent.
Exactly.
It really is.
Yeah.
This section is really grappling with the very idea of truth
It's complicated, right?
in the digital age, yeah. It's trying to separate, genuine mistakes,
We all make them.
right? We all make them, from this deliberate spreading of lies.
Right.
Especially when those lies are designed to, incite violence or ruin someone's reputation.
It's like, how do you draw the line between free speech and protecting people from actual harm?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It really is.
And it's one that courts around the world are struggling with.
Yeah,
Where do you draw that line in the sand?
it's a tough one. Okay, and then there's the issue of child pornography, Section 24. And obviously the penalties are severe.
As they should be.
Absolutely. But then they have this caveat, this public good defense,
Yeah.
which that's a whole other conversation.
It is. It's really interesting, though, because most countries, Kenya included, incredibly strict laws against child pornography.
Of course.
But this public good defense,
Yeah.
you're right, it's not used very often, but it does acknowledge that there might be, very, very specific situations where having or sharing this type of material might be justified.
Okay.
Think like law enforcement doing an investigation,
Right.
or maybe academic research into, like, online grooming tactics.
Hmm.
But the bar for this defense is really, really high,
As it should be.
as it should be.
Okay. One more before we move on. And this one, I think a lot of people this is gonna resonate with a lot of people.
Okay.
Section 37, wrongful distribution of obscene or intimate images. It feels so relevant today, especially with, revenge porn on the rise.
Oh, absolutely. Revenge porn, sextortion, these are things that sadly are becoming increasingly common
Right.
in our digital world. And what this section does, it recognizes how damaging this can be.
Oh, for sure.
This non-consensual sharing of intimate images.
Right.
It leaves victims feeling totally violated, vulnerable. And Kenya's not alone here. A lot of countries have been strengthening their laws around this, recognizing how widespread and how damaging this kind of abuse really is.
It really is. And it makes you think, like, how much power can these images have over someone?
Oh, it's incredible. And often the hardest thing is actually proving intent.
Right.
Was it really meant to be harmful?
Right.
Did they mean to cause damage?
Yeah.
These are the questions courts have to figure out.
It's tough. It's a lot to consider. Okay, so we've talked about what makes something a cybercrime in Kenya, but what about, like, the other side?
Right.
What about the authorities? What can they actually do? What kind of power does this law give them?
That's a great question, and that's where Part 4 of the Act really kicks in. It outlines all those investigative powers.
Okay.
And this is where it gets really interesting because you're trying to give the authorities the tools to do their job, to go after these cyber criminals.
Right.
But you also want to make sure you're protecting individual rights at the same time.
It's that balance again.
Exactly. It's a real balancing act.
Well, tightrope walk, yeah, for sure. So let's look at some of those powers. Section 48, it talks about search and seizure of data.
Okay.
That feels intense.
It can be. It allows them, the authorities, to get a warrant to access data, take it if they have what they call reasonable grounds to believe that it's tied to a crime. And that right there, that's the key phrase, reasonable grounds. That's what's supposed to stop them from just doing whatever they want.
Right, like a catch-all.
Exactly. But like with any law, there's always room for interpretation.
Always some gray area.
Always. And that's usually when you get those legal challenges coming up.
It makes sense.
Yeah.
So not a free-for-all for the authorities, but definitely some wiggle room.
Exactly.
Okay, then there's Section 52, which deals with real-time collection of data. This isn't just about data that's already out there. This is like intercepting it as it's happening.
Yeah.
That feels different.
It is. And this is where you really start getting into surveillance territory.
Right.
And it gets even more sensitive because now you're talking about, like, are we crossing a line? The Act does try to put some limits on it, though. Like, they can only do it for a certain amount of time.
Right.
It's supposed to make sense compared to what they're investigating.
Right.
But you do wonder, is that enough in the real world,
It's that question, like, how much are you willing to give up?
Exactly.
To stop the bad guys, basically.
It's a tough one, and it's a debate happening everywhere. I mean, look at what's going on with government surveillance in the U.S.
Right.
In the U.K., it's a global conversation.
Yeah.
How much privacy are we okay with giving up if it means more security? That's the question.
The million-dollar question, yeah. Have there been any, like, actual cases in Kenya where any of this has been challenged?
Not a ton of big ones yet, but as technology keeps changing and these powers, maybe get used more, it's something to really keep an eye on.
Yeah, I can see that. Okay, last part of our deep dive. Let's zoom out a little bit. Cybercrime, I mean, it doesn't really care about borders, right?
It really doesn't.
So how does the Act deal with that whole international aspect?
Right.
Because I'm looking at Part V, and it's all about international cooperation.
Yeah.
They even mention a central authority in Section 57.
That's right.
Sounds very official.
It does, doesn't it? Sounds like something out of a movie.
Right.
But basically, Part V is recognizing that, look, to really go after cybercrime, which, as we said, doesn't stop at borders.
Right.
Countries have to work together.
Makes sense.
So that's what this is about. Mutual legal assistance, sharing info, coordinating investigations, even extraditing suspects.
Wow.
It's all about bridging those gaps.
So the central authority, that's like the point person for all that.
Exactly. In Kenya, the central authority is actually part of the Office of the Attorney General and Department of Justice.
Okay.
They're the one to get those requests for help from other countries.
Right.
Look them over, make sure they follow Kenyan law, and if they do, they work with the local law enforcement to make it happen.
So there's a system. Okay, that's good to know.
Yeah.
But I have to imagine, in reality, dealing with all those different legal systems, priorities, that's got to be complicated.
You're telling me international cooperation when it comes to cybercrime, it can be really slow,
Oh, I bet.
bureaucratic.
Yeah.
You need a lot of trust between countries.
Yeah.
Which, let's be honest, isn't always there.
Not always a given. So while the act lays out the plan, actually making it work is probably a whole other story.
Exactly. But that being said, there have been some pretty remarkable cases where Kenya has worked with other countries to go after cybercriminals.
Oh, really?
Yeah, there was one a while back involving this big phishing scheme, very complex.
Right.
And the Kenyan authorities, they worked directly with their counterparts overseas.
Wow.
Track down those responsible.
That's amazing.
Can't go into detail, obviously.
Right, of course.
But it just goes to show that even though it's tough, international cooperation, it can work.
Yeah.
And in our world today, I mean, it's more important than ever.
Yeah, it really does. It really puts it into perspective.
It does.
So much bigger than just one place.
Hmm.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground here. Kenya's cybercrime law. What for you, what really stood out to you? What surprised you about all of this?
I think what I find most interesting is how this law is trying to stay ahead of the game.
Okay.
Because technology changes so fast, and this act, it's thorough,
Yeah.
but it's a snapshot in time, really.
That's true. And it's funny because we've talked this whole time about cybercrime, but we haven't even touched on artificial intelligence.
Right.
The metaverse. What about cryptocurrency? I mean, who knows what threats are out there that we haven't even thought of yet?
Exactly. Who knows what cybercrime will even look like in 5 years, 10 years?
It's kind of scary when you think about it.
It is, and that's the challenge, right?
Right.
How do you make laws that can actually keep up with technology,
Mm.
with all the new ways people are going to find to do bad things?
Right. It's like a moving target. And you're right. I mean, it's not just Kenya dealing with this. This is everybody.
It is. It's global.
Hmm.
And I think it highlights something really important for everyone, no matter where you are.
Okay.
What you do online matters.
It's real.
It has real consequences.
Yeah.
And this act, it really drives that point home.
It does give you pause. Makes you think. Well, for me, I'm really curious to see what happens next.
Yeah.
With this law, will it actually work? Will it, stop the bad guys? But will it do it without taking away our freedom? It's a tough one.
It's a balancing act for sure. And I'll be watching closely because one thing's for certain, this is just the beginning of the conversation.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
We're just getting started.